A buddy of mine clued me into this sub a while back, knowing that I'm a total sucker for creepy stories. Reading the posts that search and rescue guy made a while back, I felt compelled to share a few experiences of my own, mostly because his stories struck a chord with me as being similar, at least in tone, to a few of mine, even though his are definitely a tad weirder. I never got around to it, but I have a little free time at the moment, so why not? Thought I'd share, cause I feel you guys will appreciate these stories, and because I'd like to get them off my chest. Talking about the bizarre to others always tends to remove a bit of the gnawing feeling that surrounds it, even if the respite that results is brief. I've worked as a private investigator for around 5 or 6 years now, running my own business. It's usually a pretty bad idea to just up and start an independent PI company as your gateway to the job. In fact, it's pretty darn stupid. But I live in a town that's small enough that I was able to make it work. My first year or so was pretty rocky as I tried to adjust to the job, but having a couple of friends in the field to give me pointers here and there definitely helped. I eventually began to hit my stride, and as my reputation increased, so too did my client base. I won't be specific about where I live, nor will I use any real names. As a PI, people come to me with some pretty personal shit, and it's universally taboo to just go sharing the specifics with the world. The extent I'll admit is that I'm in Canada, and that I'm in a small, semi-remote town surrounded by vast, boreal forest. Not the kind you'd go exploring or hiking through with friends, but the kind that you would stay away from, because, much like the stereotype, there are bears and caribou all over the shop. Trust me, caribou will fuck your day up seriously bad. So, with that little bit of preamble out of the way, I suppose I'll start. I tend to get a lot of cases from paranoid spouses, and most I'll take, however absurd. I'm in no position to turn down a paying customer, and when they turn out to be correct, it always feels good to help them out an unfaithful partner. This case, despite having a reasonably explainable conclusion, was creepy enough to have definitely caused me to think a little more about what to accept and what to decline. Roughly 2 years ago, I get a cold call from what sounds like an older man. He asks to make sure he's called the right place, and when I tell him he has, he immediately launches into a particularly long-winded rant about how his wife is plotting against him, and how she's planning to take him out. I try to get him to calm down, and ask when he'd be able to come over to the office, so we could discuss things over a coffee. What he should bring, hash out whether or not this was a legitimate case, and if so, negotiate a fee. He's adamant that he needs to see me as soon as possible, so he comes in a couple of hours later. I don't have any cases at the time, so I'm all for it. He's an older gentleman, in around his late 50s, early 60s probably, and is visibly shaken when he shows up. We talk for a little while, and he's definitely calmed down by this point, but he's still obviously frightened. He tells me that his wife has been going out to meet with other elderly women for a sort of book club type deal, and that he's sure that they're all out for his blood. Things get really interesting when he reveals that every morning, around 4 AM, he's woken up by an abnormally loud sound, like dogs barking and growling frantically. He tells me that he always wakes up to see his wife standing in the bedroom doorway, and that 2 other elderly women resembling a few of her friends are always standing motionless behind her, making no movements, just staring. The creepy part is that his wife is still in bed with him, sleeping. They don't move as long as he doesn't, but he tells me that as soon as he performs anything noticeable, they stumble off before he has a chance to put his glasses on to get a better look. The few times that he had gone to check, he found his back door opened, but never anything else out of place. I'm a little weirded out, and at first think it must be sleep paralysis. But the fact that a previously closed door is open, and the fact that he's able to effortlessly move around rules that out. I ask if he has a carbon monoxide detector in his room. He tells me he does, and that it hasn't ever gone off. I ask about things like his address, when his wife usually leaves, when he usually leaves, the location of her book club, pictures of his wife, her friends, things like that. We come to an agreement. I take the case, and he goes off on his way. I head off to his place that night, and park my car on his street, in a location in which I can see his front door and the gate leading into his backyard. I set up my camera and turn on a podcast, since I have to be there before he goes to sleep to ensure I don't miss it, since it's possible that they could arrive before 4 AM. I'm out there for around 6 hours with no signs of any activity. The roads are dark, save for dim country streetlights, and more or less barren. There's this almost piercing feeling of silence and isolation, not unlike the town had suddenly become entirely deserted, like I'm the only living thing outside on that night. My podcast had long ended, and a permeating essence of dread enticed me to turn the music that had replaced it off, for fear of unspeakable whispers worming their way into the silence between guitar strums. 3:30 AM sharp, and almost as if on cue, the sound of a dog barking nearly gives me a heart attack. What's worse is how incredibly loud and oddly distorted it is. That is, it's odd until I realize that it's multiple dogs, as if every dog on the block started barking in eerie unison. This is when I catch a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror. 2 small, shriveled figures, and one taller, more lithe one, all slowly stumbling across the sidewalk, all clad in white dresses, appearing so suddenly, it's like NPCs have just entered my draw distance. The tint on my windows ensures they don't see me as they pass by, but I'm nonetheless silent as a mouse, deathly afraid that one might peer over into my window as they pass. Their footsteps echo as they pass my car, and as they do, my blood runs cold. It is not, in fact, 3 old ladies. It's 2 old ladies, dragging along one lifeless, stark white mannequin, rigid like a corpse, fresh from the grave, and dressed as the old man's wife. I try to shake myself out of my daze, and begin to take a few pictures with one cam, video them with the other. Sure enough, they turn right down his driveway, their mannequin in tow, and one of them unlocks the back gate, vanishing from view. I check the footage and pictures to make sure they're clear. Trying to get over the horrid bizarreness of the whole situation, I try to think of something, since it's obviously not a good idea to just leave the old couple there, with a pair of creepy old ladies who are probably suffering from dementia or something. Since it appears they're usually watching him for half an hour or so, I assume they've probably no intent to harm him, but one can never be sure. I pull out my cell and call up his phone, hoping to try and drive them out. A few minutes later, they're shambling away down the street, mannequin grinding against the pavement. I wait until they're out of view before letting out a breath of relief. The guy doesn't initially believe me when I tell him what happened, but I show him the pictures and the video, and he goes pale. Despite the definite creep factor involved, he reacts instead by letting out the deepest sigh of relief I think I've ever heard. He mumbles something, and I can see tears starting to run down his cheeks. He smiles a little melancholically and thanks me, saying that he has to apologize to his wife for not trusting her and not talking to her about it first. I'm not entirely sure what happened after, but I assume he took the photos to someone, as the visits stopped happening after that. I'm not sure of the details, but apparently the women had pretty much gone off their rockers due to old age. His wife had given one of them the keys, in case they ever wanted to come over. I honestly don't understand the logic behind this one, other than she's old, I guess. Either way, I believe the two of them are in a home of some kind now, and the husband made up with his wife pretty easily. I have plenty more where that came from, and from here on out, it only gets weirder. I'll try get right into it. I don't believe in the occult. I don't believe in the paranormal or anything of that sort. The case I'm about to describe did not change this. You really have to put a lot of trust in your senses, and bogging those very senses down with deductions, spotlighting supernatural interventions, is a pretty piss-poor decision if you want to get anywhere. I do, however, have my weird personal superstitions and idiosyncrasies. Wouldn't really be human if I didn't. I try and keep them separate from my job, but sometimes they pop up in the back of my mind regardless, picking and drilling at the grey matter in my skull in a desperate attempt to burrow their way back inside. For example, I sometimes feel that reality stops functioning correctly in complete isolation. That when things are left unobserved for a long amount of time, the unknown, unseen spaces cease to exist. Stuff that shouldn't be able to physically happen is suddenly no more than child's play, and unwelcome things that have no right existing play their fickle little games with us. I don't try to think about it too much, and I most certainly don't try to give the stupid little thought any power. Nonetheless, there's always the occasional case in which the idea is particularly tempting to indulge. It's the middle of summer, and the cicadas are chirping in their monotonous choir, like a million audio tapes, put on never-ending, ear-ending repeat. The summers are fairly cold up here, but at least there's no snow. I'm sitting in my office, finishing up one of my previous cases. Just general reports left, lots of paperwork. Boring stuff that seems to cause the world to drown in a cacophony of summer insects. The tedium is broken when my phone begins to ring. I pick it up, only to hear the voice of one of my closer PI friends on the other end. We chat casually for a few minutes, mostly just me trying to get my mind off of the writing pains in my wrist, but it's obvious that he's called for a reason. He explains that he's been on a missing person case, a small boy around the age of 4. His mother and father had divorced a few years ago, and his mother is currently holed up here in my area. The boy has apparently been missing for quite a while now. The police had been contacted first, but they turned up nothing. After a week passes with no sign of a missing person, you kind of have to start assuming the worst. Nevertheless, we're usually the last resort for these cases. So, my buddy goes asking around, and apparently he manages to dig up a couple of accounts saying that the kid was seen boarding an olive green SUV with a woman looking to be in her early 30s just hours before his disappearance was reported. Nobody thought to note the license plate. His dad, my friend tells me, had left his son home for half an hour to run out for groceries. Why he didn't take his son along with him, I don't know. At first, I thought it might be deliberate, like he had for some reason done it on purpose. Of course, the human brain works weird sometimes, and dumb little human errors are always possibilities. I can only imagine the grief that must be felt after realizing one of those tiny bursts of idiocy may have caused something so heart-wrenching. Long story short, he matches the description of the woman, mid-30s, long brown hair, overall rather average looking, to a fair amount of other women. One sticks out though, the boy's mother. The child's father had been granted sole custody of the kid. Apparently, the kid's mum had a little cabin out here, which she would regularly visit, and spend days worth of time in without alerting her husband, and whenever she was back home, she'd either be asleep or out somewhere. So my buddy says he wants to team up for this one, split the pay. He's in a slightly larger town, and the closest one to mine, but that's still a good 5-hour drive. Since he still has a few leads over on his end, he wants me to check out the mother, see if anything comes of that. It appears to me at this point that the case is pretty much cut and dry, so I accept. He emails me the address and a picture of the kid and his mother, and I finish up my paperwork before setting off. I drive around, semi-lost for a few minutes before I finally catch sight of the gravel road that breaks through the wall of bark created by the forest's border. I glance down at my phone and sigh, placing it into my pocket. Guess it was stupid to expect this to be on Google Maps. Now, I always despise having to go into the forest. As I begin to slowly pull down the path, towering green giants blotting out the sun overhead, I'm starting to regret taking this case. The gravel slowly turns to dirt, and the small break in the tree line slowly begins to disappear at my back. It's dim in here, dense pines doing a damn good job at casting an impenetrable veil of shade over the woods. Now, don't get me wrong, the Canadian boreal forests, and this one is no exception, are absolutely stunningly beautiful. Birds chirp their cheerful tunes, small rock faces jut out of the land like Mother Nature's own sculptures, and streams of sparkling clear water babble across the rocks into the cute little waterfalls, and occasionally picturesque lakes and rivers. But that's exactly why I hate these forests more than any other. More than anything, it always, without fail, seems like some horrible, sprightly facade. Like the entire forest is attempting to scrape this movie set together in order to offset the constant gnawing that I feel at the back of my neck and in the very core of my stomach whenever I come in here. The silhouette of a small building finally begins to come into view off on the horizon. So, with a small sigh, I park my car and get out. As much as I'd love to stay cooped up in that metal haven of protection, I'm here on a private investigation job. I do have to remain relatively covert. That's not happening if a car just suddenly pulls onto the front lawn of your isolated cabin. As I get a little closer, I begin to notice that something is off about the trees. I can't place exactly what it is. They just seem strange somehow. The path eventually opens up into a small clearing, a makeshift wooden gate sitting at the end of the path. It's not stopping anybody, as there's no walls on either side of it. Its only purpose seems to be presenting a tattered "No Trespassing" sign. Past the gate is the cabin. It looks to be in surprisingly good shape, and from the outside appears rather modern. In front of it is a small patch of grass, which acts as a parking space, and a few areas in which it's been worn down by tires. Slowly but surely, my eyes drift up from the patch of grass to the car that's parked on it. My heart suddenly begins to dance around in a mixture of joy and dread. Not surprisingly, it's an olive green SUV. I pull my camera up to my face and peer through the viewfinder. The SUV, the license plate, I snap a picture of each. The frame drifts over to the cabin. I snap a picture, and it's at this exact moment I realize the front door has been wide open this entire time. I go quiet on instinct, the surrounding area suddenly feeling like it's been hit with a blast of cold air. Then I hear it. A faint humming coming from inside. Soft, like a woman's voice. Once I hear it, I suddenly become unable to stop hearing it. It's a haunting, drifting tune, equal parts melodic and eerie. Every once in a while, it stops or skips a little bit, as if its source is running out of breath or having voice cracks. Before I really even know it, I'm taking a step forward. I know it's a stupid idea, but my legs are moving faster than my mind. Just a peek, I tell myself. Just one peek to satiate my curiosity, and that's it. The cabin looms over me as I get closer. The grass crunches under my feet until, finally, just barely, the inside of the building begins to come into view. I stop dead in my tracks. Branches. It takes a moment to register, but there are tree branches covering the floor. When I say covering, I mean covering. These aren't sticks. They're long, spindly, thin tree branches, deliberately cut off of their trunks. Like a natural line, my gaze follows them to the single piece of furniture in the room. A small, white coffee table, and a CD player perched on top of it, and I realize why the humming sounded like it was skipping. The trees around me suddenly feel like they're closing in on every side, like the earth below my feet is trying to swallow me whole. I don't take another moment to sit and deliberate on it. I just book it out of there as fast as I can goddamn will myself. I launch towards my car, slam the door shut, put it into reverse, and punch it out of there. That place simply felt wrong. The first thing I did was contact the police. I sure as hell wasn't going back there, but there was no way I was simply going to let it sit there like that. They investigated, and were just as weirded out as I was, but ultimately didn't turn up anything of use. The house was deserted, save for the sea of branches, the white coffee table, and the lone CD player. The SUV, too, was near pristine, not unlike a new car. The investigations continued for a while, but it was more or less a dead end. Nobody ever returned to the cabin. My buddy's leads never panned out either, and the child's mother suddenly went missing as well. We never found either of them. In the end, things unfortunately had to be called off. I most definitely have a few theories and ideas about what went down in that godforsaken place. If I'm to try to inject some semblance of sense into this, I'd say that the mum most likely did kidnap the kid. We ran the plate on the SUV, and it was registered to her. The police searched everywhere too. They turned over the branches, looked in the car, the works. Nothing. No fingerprints, residue of any kind. Nothing. The best I can assume is that the woman took the kid up here, probably gathered up anything important, food, water, precious jewels, etc., and set up this whole scene just to confuse anybody who tried to find her, to throw us off her trail. She then took her kid and either managed to somehow sneak a ride out of town, or just straight up went into the woods. If it's the latter, they're both probably dead. There's still a whole bunch in there that's assumed, and has no supporting evidence, but it's the most logical thing I can think of. I've still got more stories to tell. They only get more strange, so hopefully you'll stick around. The best things happen in the dark.